race. And in each one of these losses, though, and this is what I think I really take to heart, and I think maybe sometimes losses are more important for us than wins, for the following reason. Each time he ran, he educated a new group of people about our principles, CRA principles, American founding principles, the kind, balanced budget, common sense government, more freedom, less regulation. Each time he ran a race like that, he was educating another group of people and pushing the ball further along. So even if he didn't make it, a new group of people were exposed to our ideas. And for us, that is such an important thing. And I say that in the Bay Area because I know here in San Mateo County, for example, if I'm not mistaken, I think you guys had 2 Democrats on the ballot for Assembly here, and 2 Democrats on the ballot for Senate here. And we're getting to a point where, unfortunately, so many of our candidates, even when we have a Republican on the ballot, they're not talking about Republican themes, they're not talking about conservative themes. It's all about personality, and the other candidates are rats. And so when we lose, we haven't pushed the ball any further. We haven't educated anybody about our issues. We've just spent a lot of money on kind of a personality cult of the candidate who lost, and we haven't gotten any further. And I think that's something I really take to heart about Congressman McClintock's losses on the races where we've supported him. But one of the things that I feel good about those losses is because he always stood for the right thing. And we were always in a position to say, I told you so. And imagine what could have been. For example, if we had a majority, I work for the Board of Equalization, I'm a tax attorney, so forgive me if my mind's on taxes, but imagine if we'd had a majority on the Board of Equalization that could have affected tax policy in California and then given us a majority on the Franchise Tax Board. Or imagine if we hadn't had Governor Schwarzenegger in there passing a bunch of bonds and tax increases and instead had Governor McClintock in there actually appointing Republicans to appointed offices instead of a bunch of Democrats. How things could have been different. And now, of course, he's a shining star in Congress, and we're so happy to be represented by him. Whether you live in his district or not, I'm sure he represents you. And I was talking to him just now about, the national parks, which is something he's been a leadership on recently with Yosemite and the plans to change Yosemite, try to make it more of a wilderness area, so you and your family can't visit it anymore unless you're prepared to live out in a wilderness without vehicle access. And that's something I really respect. And then lastly, I want to give him some time to talk, but something that he may not have heard. I'm not sure if it's gotten back to him or not. But when I was working in the legislature, at a staff level in the legislature, we had something we referred to as McClintock math, and it was in a good way. What we really liked, and we wanted to see more of. And I'll tell you, a lot of other elected officials who haven't done as good a job of this were reminded many times of Tom McClintock's approach to a lot of very complicated budgetary issues in the legislature, which was take these complicated things like a $68 billion bullet train and boil that down to what is that costing you and your family? And we just don't see that enough in the legislature. It's all the numbers that we get tossed around are billions of dollars, and sometimes it's over in Congress. They seem to love to talk about 10-year periods lately. They can't even anticipate what the numbers are going to be for next year, but somehow we're always talking in terms of these imaginary 10-year periods. And Congressman McClintock is a real expert as let's filter that down to what does that cost you for this new government program or this failed regulation? What is the cost to you and your family? And once people can see it in terms of, oh, they want another $275 out of me for what? For what am I getting for this? And if more of our leaders would do that, and if at a CRA level, we would try to do that in local races too, and your local county races, your local city council races, if you can boil things down, if you can use that McClintock math to turn things to what is this costing an average family in your community, I think we would win a lot more fights over taxes than we do, where these numbers are so abstract, the average person who's not a math major can't even figure out what you're talking about. So with that, I want to thank Congressman McClintock for his famous McClintock math and what it's done to advance our cause. And thank you very much for being here at the California Republican Assembly Convention.
Tom, thank you for that trip down memory lane and all of the losses that I've sustained over the years. I am reminded, Larry Arnn once said something that really stuck with me. He says, you know, if you stand on principle, you are going to lose some races along the way. And the races you win, you're not going to win by very much. But the races that you win will mean something. And I found that to be true. Although, having said all of that, I must tell you, having won a few and lost a few, winning is better. In fact, I remember as a very young man, I was still in college, the first time I heard Senator Bill Richardson speak. He was the state senator at the time running for the U.S. Senate. And I sat there absolutely mesmerized as he stood on principle, as he did again today. And I remember just watching him and thinking, that's a guy I want to follow. And it was the great honor of my life to be able to follow him in the legislature. I must say, however, that the one ambition I've never had is to follow him at the podium, and unfortunately that is my fate today. I hope you're all as sick and tired as I am over all of the hand-wringing and bitching and moaning about the 2012 election. You know, for the last 6 months, we have been suffering the ever-helpful, ever-present guidance of such esteemed and trusted Republican fountains of wisdom as the Huffington Post and the Sacramento Bee, that the only thing wrong with Republicans, darn it, is that we're just not more like the Democrats. And that would be comical, of course, except for the fact that there are some Republican Party officials who seem to agree with them. I think it's time that we remember that we heard exactly the same advice from exactly the same sources after the 2008 election. Now, I remember a conclave of Republican officials that was held in the spring of 2009 at the height of Barack Obama's popularity. He was up in the 70s at the time. Jeb Bush lectured us that, quote, Republicans have nothing and Democrats have something, and you can't fight something with nothing, end quote. Wow. Now, his helpful advice at the time, and again I quote, it's time we put the Reagan era behind us. I suggested at the time that maybe a better idea would put the Bush era behind us. And in fact, that's exactly what we did. Republicans in Washington returned to Republican principles, and Republican leaders rediscovered Ronald Reagan's advice to paint our positions in bold colors and not hide them in pale pastels. For heaven's sakes, have we forgotten that just 2 years ago, Republicans campaigned on clear principles of individual liberty and constitutionally limited government? We took strong and united stands against Obamacare, against all of the stimulus spending. Not a single House Republican voted for the stimulus, only one for Obamacare. We took strong stands to roll back the regulatory burdens that were crushing our economy and, dare I say it, to secure our borders. Oh, yeah. And have we forgotten that in just 2.5 years ago, we had one of the most stunning midterm elections in all of American history, a net gain of 63 U.S. House seats, 6 U.S. Senate seats, 19 state legislatures, 6 governors, and nearly 700 net shift of legislative seats from Democrat to Republican in that single election just a little over 2 years ago. And yet now we're told, just 2 years later, after a net loss of just 8 House seats, 2 Senate seats, and a 2.5 percentage point loss of the White House, that we have to abandon these principles or consign ourselves to the dustbin of history. I mean, you want to look at a catastrophic election. You remember 1974? The result of that election was the Democrats held 57 U.S. Senate seats. They have 55 today. They had 291 House seats. They have barely 200 today. Back then, we heard the same chorus of impending doom that we hear today. We had to moderate our image. We had to broaden our base. In short, we had to become more like the Democrats. Here is what Ronald Reagan said at the CPAC convention to all of these naysayers back in 1975. He said this: Americans are hungry to feel once again a sense of mission and greatness. I don't know about you, but I'm impatient with those Republicans who, after the last election, rushed into print saying we must broaden the base of our party, when what they really meant was to fuzz up and blur even more the differences between ourselves and our opponents. Our people look for a cause to believe in. Is it a third party we need, or is it a new and revitalized second party, raising a banner of no pale pastels but bold colors, which make it unmistakably clear where we stand on all the issues troubling the people? He continued, let us show that we stand for fiscal integrity and sound money, and above all, for an end to deficit spending with ultimate retirement of the national debt. By God, I miss that guy. Well, fortunately, back in those days, we had the good sense to follow his advice, and just 5 years later, Ronald Reagan was sworn in as President of the United States, and shortly after that, because of Republican policies, it was morning again in America. That would never have happened if we had listened to the usual suspects of their day and become a pathetic reflection of the Democrats. I think Phil Graham's put it best when he said, well, why would anyone want to vote for a fake Democrat when they can have the real thing? And I think as we reflect on this, we need to heed a little of Mark Twain's advice when he said, we should be careful to get out of an experience only the wisdom that's in it and stop there, lest we be like the cat that sits on a hot stove lid. She will never sit down on a hot stove lid again, and that is good. But also she will never sit down on a cold one anymore. Now there are lessons that we need to learn, and learn well from 2012, and in California from 2010 as well. But capitulation is not one of them. Cold stove lids that we're told we mustn't sit on. And the first one's illegal immigration. The Republicans, they say, just have to accept the notion that our nation can no longer control its borders, and we should declare amnesty for the 11 million plus illegal aliens now in the country. We should do so, we're told, because our position on border security has hopelessly alienated Latino voters who would otherwise share our values. You've all heard that one over and over again these past 6 months. Well, it is true that Latino voters are a growing part of the American electorate. They make up to 10% of the vote in 2012, of which 71% voted for Barack Obama, according to the CBS exit poll. That means they added 4% to the Democratic margin. Nothing to sneeze at. But Sean Trendy is the senior political analyst over at Real Clear Politics. Last May, he published an article addressing this argument quite directly, and his analysis of the numbers, and he's not a Republican, but his analysis of the numbers was very revealing. First, he said, Latino voters are not a monolithic group on this issue. Citing 2008 exit polling, he noted that a majority of Latino voters, quote, either thought that illegal immigration was fairly unimportant or thought that it was important and voted Republican. So why are Latino voters voting for Democrats? Well, very simply said, once you adjust for socioeconomic status, Latinos vote pretty much the same as the general voting population, but because they're disproportionately poor, they tend to vote disproportionately Democratic. However, as they begin to work their way up the socioeconomic ladder and assimilate into American society, they become more and more Republican. Second, he said, citing research from the Pew Institute, the wave of illegal immigration is now crested and may actually be reversing. He noted that every immigration wave has followed the same pattern. Those who decide to stay become more and more assimilated and more Republican as the years go by. Remember, as recently as 20 years ago, we used to hear a lot about the Irish vote or the Italian vote. Remember those days? We don't talk about that anymore. Why? Because they've melded into the general population. There no longer is an Italian vote or an Irish vote. And Trendy said that the demographic tide is not running against the Republicans, it is actually running with us. Third point he makes, is that a very sizable part of the Republican base is firmly opposed to illegal immigration, and that abandoning this position would be politically catastrophic. He reminded us, quote, "In a large, diverse country, every move to gain one member of a political coalition usually alienates another member." We really want to appeal to Latino voters, he pointed out. What we need to do is support Obamacare and higher taxes for more social service. Those are the hot-button issues, according to what they're telling pollsters. Otherwise, these are not voters who are going to suddenly vote for the Republican banner simply because we reversed our position on border security. Now, that's not to say that Republicans should ignore the Latino vote, far from it, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. But to suggest that Republicans need to reverse themselves on a fundamental issue of national sovereignty and the rule of law is unprincipled, it is counterproductive, it is self-destructive, and it is wrong.
That's right.
Ironically, the issues where most Latino and African American voters do agree with us are on the social issues, like abortion and marriage. But of course, we're told by the same naysayers that we should repudiate our positions on all of those messy social issues, too. And in fact, let's look closer at the polling on the social issues. According to the exit polling by Public Opinion Strategies, it is true that 5% of voters in 2012 said that the most important issue in their vote for president was their pro-choice, pro-abortion position. 5% of the entire electorate is nothing to sneeze at. But 4% of voters said that the most important issue in casting their vote for president was their pro-life, anti-abortion position. That's a statistical tie. Now, I have a question for you. How many of these hardcore, single-issue, abortion-on-demand Obama voters will suddenly switch their votes to Republican once we've renounced our position on that issue? Now, here's a bonus question. How many of that 4% of the electorate who supported us solely because of our pro-life position are going to stay with us once we repudiated them? I think it's important in politics to know the difference between addition and subtraction. Addition, of course, is what creates majorities. Subtraction is what destroys them. And in this single exercise, we have just subtracted 4% of the entire American electorate from our vote and added little or nothing. Now, repeat this process on every other so-called social issue and tell me if we will be better off or worse off for taking this advice. And with all this in mind, there is no blinking at the fact that we lost an election that we should have won. And to pretend there's nothing wrong meets Einstein's definition of insanity. There's a great deal wrong and a great deal that we need to address. The voters who appeared at the polls and voted overwhelmingly, voted by about a 2.5% margin for Barack Obama, told the exit pollsters they agree with us on virtually every issue. According to the CBS exit poll, by a plurality of 49 to 44, they want to repeal some or all of Obamacare. And that's before they've had their real education. They agree with us on the size of government by a margin of 51 to 43%. The 2012 electorate that overwhelmingly voted for Obama, we are told, say they believe that government is, quote, doing too many things better left to businesses and individuals. They sound like Republicans or Democrats. They agree with us on taxes by a resounding margin of 63 to 33%. They told the CBS News exit pollers that they disagreed with the statement that, quote, taxes should be raised to help cut the deficit. Perhaps most telling of all, 52% of voters agreed that things in this country today are seriously off on the wrong track, and yet a slight majority voted to continue down that wrong track for another 4 years. As Lincoln said, the voters are everything. If the voters get their backsides too close to the fire, they'll just have to sit on the blisters a while. It's a painful experience, but it's a learning experience. And at the end of that experience, they emerge sadder and wiser and in time for the next election. And the fact of the matter is they are about to get a graduate level course in Obamacare and in Obamanomics. And at the end of that 4-year course, they are going to be a lot sadder and a lot wiser, and I believe a lot more Republican. We are winning on the issues. And that means that over time we will win on the votes. But only if we stay true to our principles and true to the millions of Americans who are already with us, and many more who may not consider themselves Republicans today, but who believe as we believe. Let me ask you this. What was the single biggest political movement in 2009 and 2010 leading up to that historic Republican landslide in 2010? Yeah, it was the much maligned, politically incorrect Tea Party. They energized fully 1/3 of the American electorate across party lines. And by the way, although 60% of them self-identified as Republicans, 20% were independents, and 20% were Democrats. Now, long before the Tea Party, didn't we have another name for that phenomenon? Isn't that what we used to call the Reagan Coalition? But last year, those who tell us that we need a bigger tent told the Tea Party to get out of that tent. And many did. Let me ask you this. Who brought in a tidal wave of young people into this party? Yeah, the much maligned, politically incorrect Ron Paul, whose simple message of unadulterated freedom resonated deeply across college campuses. You remember, 8,500 students turned out at UC Berkeley to hear that message. But last year, those who tell us that we need a bigger tent told Ron Paul and his supporters to get out. And they did. And in fact, many of them turned around and voted for Obama. A well-intentioned supporter emailed me after the election. He said, well, I hope you can see now we've got to kick the religious right out of the party. I reminded him that that's exactly what we did in 1976, and the religious right voted for Jimmy Carter. How did that one work out? My point is, you cannot build a majority by systematically ejecting the constituent parts of that coalition. You build a majority by adding to that coalition, by taking your principles to new constituencies. I mean, working Americans of every race know instinctively that you cannot borrow and spend your way rich. We need to appeal to them. Immigrants came to this country to escape the stultifying central planning and the corrupt bureaucracies that ravaged their economies. We need to appeal to them. For the first time in our history, young people face a bleaker future than their parents enjoyed. We need to appeal to them. The very groups of voters who are most damaged by Obama's policies are those who voted for Obama. We need to appeal to them. Not by changing our principles, but rather by convincing them that our principles have the greatest chance of securing their happiness and their prosperity. And not in the closing days of a campaign, but right now, every day. Now, we need to recognize that a large portion of our population is no longer familiar with the self-evident truths of the American founding. They have no compass by which to steer back to the prosperity and happiness and fulfillment that is the hallmark of free societies. Without that clarion call, without a party of freedom willing to paint our positions in bold colors, I am afraid that as the economy suffocates under the avalanche of governmental burdens and intrusions, restrictions, regulations, and edicts, people in their growing despair will increasingly turn to the false hope that paternalistic government offers. The only antidote to that is the self-evident truth of the American founding, that freedom works, and it is time that we put it back to work. And like it or not, for all of the slings and arrows of the radical left and their media mouthpieces, at this moment in our nation's history, the only party equipped to revive and restore those truths and take them to the millions of Americans who are desperately searching for them is our party. You know, great parties are built upon great principles, and they are judged by their devotion to those principles. Since its inception, the central principle of the Republican Party can be summarized in a word: freedom. The closer we've hewn to this principle, the better we've done. The farther we've drifted from it, the worse that we and the country have done. Dick Armey put it more simply: when we act like us, we win, and when we act like them, we lose. Margaret Thatcher, God bless her, put it a little more eloquently. She said, first you win the argument, then you win the vote. We're not going to win the political battle until we win the battle over principles. And we need to begin that campaign today. We can be confident that these principles resonate, but only when we're true to them with our existing constituencies while we reach out with them to new constituencies. Now, here in California, we face an even steeper climb. Since the recall election 10 years ago, the Census Bureau reports that 2.3 million more people have moved out of our state than have moved in. 2.3 million. The sad fact is, Republicans are still winning the vote in California. The problem is that people are now voting with their feet. To Texas, to Tennessee, to Florida, to the desert, to Utah, and Arizona, and Nevada, millions of Californians are fleeing the relentless grind of regulation and taxation and redistribution and litigation that years of leftist politics have inflicted on California. A generation ago, families seeking a better future for their children flocked to California. Today, those same families flee from California. So for Californians, the choices become very basic. It's fight or flight. That produces both danger and opportunity for us. The danger is that we're running out of Republicans. The opportunity is, as I said, that the people hurt the most by leftist Democratic policies are the very people voting for them. That's something that we can change if we just reach out and if we stand firm. Unfortunately, in 2010, while national Republicans were returning to our principles and rallying one of the greatest congressional landslides in American history, California Republicans were embracing the ruinous tax increases and budget deficits that a Republican governor had imposed. Now, I never thought it was possible, but our statewide ticket in 2010 actually managed somehow to get themselves to the left of Jerry Brown. I mean, we laugh about it, but while Republicans were standing against public employee pension reform in order to protect the prison guards union, you remember Jerry Brown? He was out there campaigning on a theme of a balanced budget and no tax increases without your permission. You know, Ronald Reagan said we needed a new and revitalized second party, raising a banner of no pale pastels but bold colors. To accomplish this will require a new and revitalized CRA, insisting that this party raise that banner once again. That's where this organization and each of you here today literally has a rendezvous with destiny. We've seen our principles galvanize and energize this state and this nation when this party has raised them, and we can be confident that we can do so again. And that crusade begins in this room with this group at this moment. That is our challenge. That's our destiny. That is the salvation of our country. And now, fellow Republicans, let's pull up our socks, wipe our noses, and get back in this fight.